The cafe was half empty, the kind of quiet place where the smell of roasted beans lingered longer than the sound of conversation. Soft jazz floated through the air, brushing against the clinking of cups and the hiss of steaming milk. Aiden sat at the farthest corner table, the one nearest to the window, his fingers tapping the rim of his coffee cup in a rhythm that betrayed his nerves. He checked his watch for what felt like the 10th time in 5 minutes. He wasn't the kind of guy who went on blind dates. He barely liked regular dates. But his best friend, Mark, had been relentless for weeks. "You've been single too long," Mark had said. "It's time you at least meet someone." So, here he was, wearing his best shirt, hair styled with more care than usual, pretending he wasn't nervous while every part of him screamed to run. The bell over the cafe door chimed, and a few heads turned. Aiden glanced up absently, expecting another random customer. But the sight made him straighten in his chair. She walked in with a kind of quiet confidence, like the world around her had slowed just a little to make room. Her long dark hair framed her face in soft waves, and there was something about the way she looked around. Calm, observant, as if she was taking in every detail before deciding where to step. She was beautiful, yes, but that wasn't what caught Aiden off guard. It was familiarity. Something faint but undeniable tugged at him, like a half-remembered dream. She approached his table. "You must be Aiden," she said with a smile that felt both new and strangely known. "I'm Clara." For a second, his words caught in his throat. "Nice to meet you," he managed, standing up to shake her hand. Her touch was warm, steady, yet delicate. He gestured to the seat across from him. When she sat down, there was an ease to her movements, the kind that made him wonder if she'd been in this exact place before, or if he'd seen her somewhere he couldn't recall. "So," she began, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup as the waiter placed it gently on the table. "Mark told me you were a little hesitant about this." Aiden chuckled softly. "That obvious, huh?" She laughed, a light, genuine sound that made the corners of her eyes crinkle just slightly. "It's okay. I wasn't too excited either. Blind dates aren't exactly my comfort zone." "Good," Aiden said, relieved. "Then we're both suffering equally." Her laughter came again, this time softer, more natural. They started with the usual questions: where they worked, what they liked to do, how they knew Mark. Clara talked about her job at a small publishing house, how she loved editing stories that made her cry or smile, how words had a strange power to heal. Aiden told her about his work in architecture, about how he loved designing spaces that made people feel something, not just look pretty. Every word seemed to fall into place with surprising ease, yet that nagging feeling remained, a faint sense of déjà vu that refused to fade. At one point, she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and the gesture hit him like a spark. He'd seen it before, somewhere. The tilt of her head, the faint crease between her brows when she smiled. It all felt too specific to be coincidence. "Have we met before?" The question slipped out before he could stop himself. Clara looked up, surprised. "Met before?" He shrugged awkwardly. "Sorry, that sounded weird. You seem familiar, that's all." Her expression softened, but there was a flicker in her eyes, a shadow that passed too quickly for him to read. "Maybe I just have one of those faces." "Maybe," he said, but his chest felt tight. They moved on. She asked about his favorite places to visit. He told her about the small coastal town he used to escape to when life felt heavy, the one with a lighthouse and a view that looked like something out of a dream. She listened intently, resting her chin on her hand, and for a moment it felt like they weren't strangers meeting for the first time. At one point, rain began to fall outside, tapping gently against the glass beside them. The cafe lights glowed warmer in contrast, and the whole world seemed to shrink down to just their table. 2 cups of coffee, 2 people who shouldn't have known each other but somehow did. Aiden noticed small things, how she stirred her drink absent-mindedly, even after the sugar had dissolved. How she smiled a half-second later than most people, like she waited to see if the moment deserved it. How her voice had a soft rasp at the end of certain words, something he found inexplicably comforting. They talked for almost an hour. Time had slipped away without either of them realizing. At one point, she glanced outside, watching the rain trail down the window. "Funny," she murmured. "Rain always makes me think of new beginnings." Aiden smiled. "Most people think of it as something gloomy." "Not me," she said. "When it rains, I feel like the world is getting washed clean." He didn't know why, but the words lingered in his mind. When she turned back toward him, her eyes caught the light, and he noticed the faintest scar near her wrist. A thin white line, almost hidden, but still visible. Something deep inside him stirred again. He wanted to ask, "Where did you get that?" But he didn't. It wasn't his place. Not yet. Instead, he said, "You know, I almost canceled today." She smiled knowingly. "You too?" "Yeah. Mark had to practically threaten to show up at my door." "I get that." She paused, tracing the rim of her cup with her finger. "Sometimes it's easier to stay alone. Feels safer." He nodded. "Yeah, less complicated." They exchanged a quiet look, one that said more than either of them dared to put into words. For a moment, neither spoke. The music played softly in the background, an old saxophone tune that wrapped around them like a shared secret. The rain outside thickened, streaking the glass in silver lines. Finally, she smiled again. "I'm glad you didn't cancel." Aiden's lips curved into a small, genuine smile, the kind that hadn't come easily for a long time. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too." As the evening light dimmed and the cafe lights grew warmer, Aiden still couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't their first meeting, that something had connected them long before this night. He just didn't know what. But one thing he did know. This didn't feel like a random blind date anymore. It felt like the beginning of something unfinished, something that had been waiting patiently to continue. For a while, the conversation flowed easily. They talked about their jobs, their favorite books, the songs they listened to on lonely nights. Clara had a soft way of speaking, measured, deliberate, like she weighed every word before releasing it. Aiden found himself leaning forward unconsciously, drawn to the way she spoke as much as to what she said. Still, that strange tension hovered between them, invisible but present like static before a storm. Every time she smiled, Aiden felt a flicker of something tugging at the back of his mind. He couldn't name it, but it was there, recognition that refused to show its face. She laughed when he told her about the time his firm accidentally swapped 2 blueprints, and a rich client almost ended up with a garage instead of a swimming pool. He chuckled when she described her editor's obsession with correcting people's grammar in text messages. The laughter sounded natural, but underneath, something about her tone kept brushing against memory. The cafe had grown quieter now. Rain still tapped the window in steady rhythm. The barista wiped tables in slow circles, lost in her own thoughts. A couple near the door whispered over a shared dessert. It felt like the whole place had shrunk around them, like the world had decided to listen in on what would happen next. Clara's eyes flicked toward Aiden's hands as he spoke, watching them move, the faint scars across his knuckles catching the light. She noticed everything, his nervous habit of tracing the edge of his cup, the way his shoulders relaxed when he smiled. At one point, she said softly, "You seem like someone who's been through a lot." He blinked. "What makes you say that?" She shrugged lightly, eyes still on him. "You talk about life like it owes you answers." Her words hit deeper than she could have known. For a heartbeat, Aiden didn't reply. She couldn't have known about the accident years ago, the sleepless nights that followed, or the hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and loss. Could she? He forced a smile. "Maybe I'm just getting old." She smiled back, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Silence settled for a moment, comfortable at first, then uneasy. The cafe's playlist changed to a slow piano piece. Clara's fingers tapped once, twice, then stopped. Her expression shifted. Something unreadable passed over it. A hesitation that wasn't there before. Then she leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the table. "Aiden," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Sure," he said, though his chest tightened. "You don't remember me, do you?" The question landed like a dropped glass, sharp, startling, final. Aiden blinked. I'm sorry. You don't remember me. It wasn't accusation. It wasn't even disappointment. It was something softer, sad, resigned, as if she already knew the answer. He stared at her, trying to read her face. Have we met before? Her lips parted slightly, her voice trembling just enough to betray the calm she tried to keep. 5 years ago, she said, at St. Mary's Hospital. He frowned, struggling to piece it together. Hospital? She nodded slowly. You were there after the highway crash. Room 214, Aiden's pulse spiked. The number hit him first, then the smell, the sterile air, the beeping monitors, the endless white of the ceiling tiles. His throat went dry. Wait. Clara's eyes glistened now. You held my hand when I thought I was going to die. The world seemed to tilt. For a moment, all he could hear was the faint hum of the espresso machine and the thudding of his own heartbeat. He remembered flashes, blinding headlights, twisted metal, sirens wailing in the distance. He'd been in that hospital for weeks, drifting in and out of painkillers and sleepless nights. There had been someone else in the next bed, a girl who talked to him through the curtain when the nurses left. A girl with a soft voice and a laugh that didn't belong in a hospital. You, he whispered, his voice barely audible. She nodded once. I was in 213, the girl with the broken spine. He leaned back slowly, running a trembling hand through his hair. God, I remember the voice. You used to. Tell me stories at night so I wouldn't panic when the machines beeped. Clara smiled through the tears gathering in her eyes. You told me I was the bravest person you'd ever met. You said if we both got out of there, we'd meet again someday. That you owed me coffee. She glanced down at the cup between them. Guess you finally paid your debt. He couldn't find words. The cafe around them blurred, voices melting into background noise. For a moment, he wasn't 32 sitting in a quiet cafe. He was 27 again, lying in a hospital bed, clutching the hand of a stranger, while both of them prayed they'd see sunlight again. You walked again, he finally said, voice cracking. After a year of therapy, she gave a shaky laugh. Doctors said I'd never stand. Guess I like proving people wrong. Aiden's eyes softened, guilt crawling up his throat. Why didn't you tell me sooner? When you walked in, when we started talking. Clara looked down at her hands, twisting her napkin into small folds. I wanted to see if you'd know. If something in you would remember me before I said it. She paused, her voice barely above a whisper. I hoped I still mattered enough to be remembered. Aiden reached across the table, hesitated, then gently placed his hand over hers. You mattered, he said. You still do. Her fingers trembled under his. They sat like that for a while, two people trying to bridge 5 lost years with silence. Aiden remembered how he'd left the hospital abruptly after his discharge. Too broken, too scared to revisit the pain. He hadn't asked about the girl in 213. He'd assumed she hadn't made it. The thought had haunted him sometimes late at night, but he'd buried it under work and time. And now she was sitting in front of him, alive, strong, smiling through tears. I searched for you, Clara said quietly. But your records were private. I only found out your name because Mark's cousin used to work at St. Mary's. I never thought I'd actually meet you again. Aiden exhaled shakily. I guess fate wanted us to finish that coffee. Clara smiled faintly. Maybe fate has a sense of humor. For the first time all evening, the tension between them shifted, from unease to recognition, from something haunting to something tender. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. The streetlights reflected on the wet pavement, turning the world into rippling gold. Inside, their cups sat empty, forgotten. Clara looked at him quietly. You were my reason to fight back then, she said. When I thought I'd never walk again, I remembered your words, that sometimes strangers save us more than doctors do. Aiden's throat tightened. He wanted to say something, anything, but nothing seemed enough. So he simply held her gaze, and in that silence, she knew he remembered everything. For a long time, they didn't move. The cafe's door opened, letting in a gust of cold air, but neither of them looked away. It wasn't a blind date anymore. It was a memory coming home. The words echoed in Aiden's mind like a bell tolling through fog. You held my hand when I thought I was going to die. And suddenly, the wall inside him, the one built from time, guilt, and the desperate need to forget, cracked open. Images came flooding back, uninvited but unstoppable. The screech of tires, the violent spin of headlights against rain, the sound of glass shattering like falling stars. And then, darkness. He remembered waking up to the sterile hum of machines, his ribs aching with every breath. He had been broken, bruised, scared, and then there was that voice, soft, steady, whispering through the curtain that separated their beds. "Hey," she had said, her tone trembling yet gentle. "You awake?" He had been too weak to answer, but she had kept talking anyway, about her fear, her pain, the doctors, and then her dreams. How she wanted to walk again, how she missed the smell of rain, how she used to dance in her living room when no one was watching. Every night, when pain kept him awake, her voice would find him. It became his lifeline, and now, here she was, alive, real, sitting right in front of him. Aiden swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "Clara, I thought you didn't make it." Her eyes shimmered. "I almost didn't," she said, her tone soft but steady. "There were nights when I wanted to give up. The pain was unbearable, but every time I felt like quitting, I remembered your words." "My words?" he asked, frowning. "You told me," she said, eyes locked on his, "that sometimes pain is just proof that we're still alive. That as long as we can feel it, we still have a chance to fight." He closed his eyes, his heart twisting with guilt and awe. "I said that?" She smiled faintly. "You said it like you didn't believe it yourself." But it kept me going. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight, soft and pale, began filtering through the clouds, spilling across the cafe's windows like a quiet blessing. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty now. It was full of everything they couldn't say. Finally, Aiden asked, "Why didn't you reach out sooner?" Clara took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around her cup. "I tried, but I didn't know your full name. And by the time I was discharged, you were gone. They said you'd moved hospitals. I searched online, asked around, even visited St. Mary's again a year later. Nothing." Her voice trembled as she added, "After a while, I told myself maybe it wasn't meant to be. But part of me still believed we'd meet again." Aiden's chest tightened. "And now, 5 years later, we do. On a so-called blind date." Clara laughed softly, wiping at her eyes. "Maybe fate has a funny sense of humor." "Or maybe," he said quietly, "it keeps promises better than we do." She looked at him then. Really looked. The man sitting across from her wasn't the boy she'd met in that hospital. The years had added lines around his eyes, a certain tiredness in his gaze. But the gentleness she'd remembered was still there, buried under all the years he'd spent running from his own past. Aiden stared back, remembering everything, the beeping machines, the cold nights, her quiet strength. He remembered how he'd thought of her when he'd learned to walk again, when he'd returned to work, when he'd passed by hospitals and had to look away. He had buried her memory because it hurt too much to think of her gone. Now, he felt that pain again, but this time, it was beautiful. "I thought losing you was punishment," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Like I didn't deserve to know how your story ended." Clara shook her head. "You didn't lose me. You just didn't know where to look." For a long while, they just sat there, the afternoon light painting their faces gold. Around them, life went on, cups clinking, people laughing, doors opening and closing. But inside their corner of the cafe, time felt still. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn photo. She slid it across the table. It was of her hospital room, 2 beds, a thin curtain, and on her nightstand, a paper crane. The same kind Aiden had made out of his meal napkin one night to cheer her up. "You kept this?" he asked, stunned. "I kept everything that reminded me I was alive," she said softly. "That crane sat by my bed through every surgery. It reminded me there was someone out there who understood. Aiden's throat tightened. He didn't know whether to smile or cry, so he did both. I never thought something so small could matter. Sometimes, she whispered, the smallest things save us. They sat in silence again, and this time it wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Finally, Aiden broke the quiet. So what now? Clara tilted her head, the corners of her mouth lifting. Now we finish that story we started. He smiled faintly. You mean the one where you promised to make me smile for real? She laughed, wiping away another tear. Exactly that one. He reached across the table again, his hand finding hers. This time she didn't pull away. The warmth that passed between them wasn't just comfort. It was recognition. The kind that only comes from souls that have already known each other once before. I never believed in fate, he said quietly. And now? She asked. He looked into her eyes and saw everything. Pain, strength, love, and 5 years of life that had led them back to this very moment. Now, he whispered. I believe it never forgot about us. Clara smiled through tears. I told you I would find you. He nodded, his eyes glistening. And you did. The barista brought their check, but neither of them reached for it. They just sat there, two hearts rediscovering their rhythm. When they finally stood to leave, the world outside looked new again. The rain had stopped completely, the air smelled fresh, and the clouds had begun to break apart into patches of gold and blue. They stepped out of the cafe together, side by side, without saying a word. But the silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of understanding, the kind that doesn't need sound to exist. As they walked down the street, the late afternoon sun reflected off puddles, scattering light around their feet. Aiden glanced sideways at her. So where to? Clara smiled. Somewhere with no hospitals, just sunlight. He laughed, that same unguarded laugh she had once promised to bring out of him. Deal. They walked on, leaving behind 5 years of questions and half-remembered pain. And as they turned the corner, Aiden couldn't help but think that maybe love didn't always arrive when you were ready. It arrived when fate decided you'd earned it. He looked at her again, the woman he'd once known only as a voice in the dark, and realized that the universe had a strange way of keeping promises. It wasn't a blind date. It never had been. It was the universe finishing what it started.